Morning, everyone. I'm going to turn things over to Nikita.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I am honored and humbled to have this opportunity to address you today as we, the youth of the Bahamas, let our voices be heard as part of the global climate strike. Over the past 2 weeks, our country has suffered loss unlike we have ever known, nor could we have imagined. We have lost our two major economic engines outside of New Providence. Communities have been destroyed and lives have been lost. Hurricane Dorian is an example of our new normal. The Bahamas, along with our brothers and sisters in the region, are sitting ducks every hurricane season as we pray our island will be spared. Small island developing states, like the Bahamas, contribute less than 1% to global carbon emissions. Yet we are the first to suffer. I had just celebrated my 4th birthday in '92, when for the first time in an international setting, the connection was made between climate change and the vulnerability of small island developing states like the Bahamas. Almost 30 years later, 2 weeks ago, I witnessed my home and my Bahamian family be devastated by the effects of climate change in the form of Hurricane Dorian. As the founder and executive director of Young Marine Explorers, a Bahamian community conservation organization based in Cat Island, I knew that if we could not find opportunity and hope within this disaster, we ran the very real risk of continuing the status quo, which would inevitably wipe us off the map. Our islands would be devastated and underwater, with our people having no place to go but be washed away with the tides. As a result, I sent out a call. I asked friends and colleagues throughout the Bahamas and around the world to work with me to establish the Cat Island Conservation Institute. CICI is a league of superheroes and supersheroes. Our work is based on the premise that everyone has a superpower. Everyone is an expert in something. Everyone has a passion burning inside them. It is through harnessing the collective powers that we will be able to combat climate change and rebuild our island nation, capable of surviving the changes in our climate and ensuring that the people of the Bahamas and every small island developing state thrives, as this is our inherent human right. Hurricane Dorian has provided an opportunity for every individual in our country to become an active participant in how we restructure, imagine, and develop our country. The work of CICI is dedicated to improving the lives of our communities and our world by addressing climate change and cultivating climate action in interdisciplinary, innovative, and creative ways. CICI is a nonpartisan institute that is community-driven and serving. Working in our communities, we co-create programs that help us better understand the needs of our community. We train community scientists who work as direct collaborators with professional scientists to gather robust and quality data required for us as a nation to make evidence-based decisions. CICI translates the needs of our communities into policy. My call to action today is for every single person in the Bahamas, throughout the region, and around the world to join me in solidarity to protesting climate injustice. With your commitment to lend your superpowers in the capacity that you can to create a new way of being. Together, we will create a world where everyone thrives. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge and thank all the CICI founding thought leaders who heard my call and rallied with me from around the world, from Seychelles, Guatemala, Costa Rica, Haiti, Canada, the United States, and of course throughout the Bahamas. I would like to thank the YME board members who have nurtured my passion and ambition for conservation. I would like to thank UNESCO, who has invested in me and worked with me as I developed YME and have provided seed funding to establish the Cat Island Conservation Institute. I would like to thank the many donors who at the last minute made the inaugural CICI think tank possible: the Bahamas Revisited Community, Stephanie Clare Insurance Brokers, Venture Co-working, Pirate Republic, Cacao, Mr. Ezra Russell. Additionally, I would like to thank the government of the Bahamas, who have supported the work of CICI from its inception. Additionally, before I end, I would like to thank my parents who have supported me in every way and fostered this belief that I truly have the ability to change the world. With that being said, I would like to pass the floor to Mr. Charles Hamilton, who will speak on the participatory process of drafting the climate emergency declaration.
Good morning, Bahamas, and good morning, world. The goal of a climate crisis, the goal of the Climate Crisis Declaration is for governments to adopt at the highest level their acknowledgement and their commitment to address climate change and the broader ecological crisis. The idea for these types of declarations started from 2016, and as of July 19th, 2019, 19 countries, over 1,000 governments, primarily at the local level, have passed a climate emergency declaration. The Bahamas, by making this declaration, will show itself to be a leader as the first small island developing state and 7th country at a national level to adopt its stance. And how this declaration was produced is what is so powerful. It was done by CICI thought leaders who played a leading role in drafting this declaration. Our first think tank was held last Saturday, September 14th, at Venture Co-working, bringing together Bahamians from Abaco, Andros, Cat Island, Eleuthera, Grand Bahama, Long Island, and New Providence, in addition to members of the Bahamian diaspora and international partners. CICI thought leaders span various strata of society, from fishermen, engineers, scientists and teachers, realtors, economists, public health specialists, activists, and community members, and represent youth and youth at heart, who will be inheritors of a Bahamas and a planet that has to cope with the effects of climate change. At our think tank, these passionate people developed the first draft of this declaration. Then our CICI policy team refined the final draft, which will be shared with the media, the Bahamian public, and our world. As is the focus and principles of CICI Bahamas, this document is not ours. It's a community document. And so, it will be community members who have joined us today who will share the declaration to the world. Bold and immediate steps will be required from 2019 and beyond to ensure that the Bahamas and our people will be able to experience climate justice. And CICI Bahamas will be there along the way to ensure that our community needs and national policies align for our future of our country. I'll pass it back to Nikita.
At this point, I'm going to invite the most recent Young Marine Explorers alumni from Cat Island to read the Climate Emergency Declaration, as this declaration is for them.
They're going to read. This young man
And she's
one, yeah, let them come.
Yeah, that's fine.
I've got this somewhere.
Good morning. Be it resolved that this House recognizes that the Bahamas is facing an impending and existential threat due to climate change. Climate change is real and an urgent crisis. It is driven by human activity directly and disproportionately impact the citizens, residents, visitors, environment, biodiversity, infrastructure, culture, economy, and the economy of the Bahamas. Climate change is significantly impacts small island developing states and low-lying coastal communities like the Bahamas and other countries across the Caribbean and the world, rendering them particularly vulnerable. Bahamian residents and visitors have continued to experience cataclysmic effects and impacts of climate change, such as sea level rising, hurricanes, heat waves, coastal erosions, ocean acidification, loss of coral and marine ecosystems and resources, reduction of biodiversity, food and water insecurity, and re-emerging and new illnesses, all of which significantly impact physical health, mental health, well-being, social, economic development across our communities. Climate change has powered the increased frequency and intensity of extreme weather events, specifically catastrophic hurricanes, such as Joaquin 2015, Matthew 2016, Irma 2017, and Dorian 2019. Some of the strongest tropical cyclones to develop in the Atlantic basin, which have brought devastation, floods, tropical cyclones to develop, which have brought devastation, floods, severe rainfall, extreme winds, structural damage, financial loss, displacement of people and families, personal injuries, increased disabilities, and loss of lives in our communities. Category 5 hurricane like Dorian are projected to be an unwelcome future norm and will require a significant change in how we approach issues related to development. Climate change, mitigation and adaptation, desires response and risk reduction, environmental production, and climate resilience. Moving forward, data-driven and sustainability action is critical to the survival of the citizens and the residents of the Bahamas and the future of the islands.
Therefore, let the host declare that the Commonwealth of the Bahamas is in national climate emergency, which requires a commitment to mobilizing resources and prioritizing policy as it relates to the mitigation and adaptation of climate change in our country. Furthermore, we declare that immediate and bold action by the Bahamas, other CICs, and the international community is required to address this climate crisis. National, regional, and global strategic partnerships are essential to strengthen policy as it relates to climate resilience and emergency response systems. We recognize and welcome the work of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and call for action from all parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change to undertake mitigation actions based on the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities to avoid any further increase of global temperatures. We reaffirm our commitment to national and international environmental policies, agreements, and standards we have subscribed to, such as, but not limited to, A, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, including the Paris Agreement, B, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, C, the CICI Accelerated Modalities of Action Pathway, D, the Convention on Biological Diversity, E, the Ramsar Convention, F, the Sandy Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, G, the Regional Comprehensive Disaster Management Strategy and Programming Framework 2014 through 2024. Lastly, the Bahamas National Policy for the Adaptation to Climate Change. We commit to establishing and achieving national adaptation targets to create sustainable infrastructure and prevent the most catastrophic events of climate change, including the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. Finally, we commit to becoming a leader of climate advocacy and to engage all critical stakeholders, in particular the youth, for whom this action is most essential, in the constructing and cultivation of a thriving planet that supports a global community of thriving people. Thank you.
All right, therefore, we at the Ministry of Environment and Housing, and in my capacity as Minister of Environment and Housing, we acknowledge that we are in a national climate crisis and the country is facing a national climate emergency. And we are committed to doing all that needs to be done to alleviate and remediate the effects of climate change and build resiliency for future events. I want to say that in the beginning when climate change came up, there were some skeptics out there. There still are. But the data is clear. If you just look at this month of August alone, it was the hottest month on record. And so what that means is that since we've been recording temperature, since the invention of the thermometer, it was the hottest month on record. And we saw the effects of that. We saw record temperatures in India. We saw manure spontaneously ignite in Spain. We had heat waves in the North Pole and in Alaska. I mean, these things are unheard of in our lifetime. And here in the Bahamas, we had Hurricane Dorian, which was the strongest hurricane in the North Atlantic since we've been recording hurricanes. So the evidence is clear. The problem with scientific evidence is that it can't give you ethics. It can't tell you what to do and what the right thing is to do and what kind of right responses to take. And so I congratulate all of the NGOs that have made this possible because it calls on all of us to make the difference. I point out that here at the Ministry of Environment and Housing, we certainly have been doing our part in the fight against climate change. And we all know that climate change is a major contributor to it, is carbon dioxide and methane. And we've done our part in relation to the sanitary landfill. We executed a new agreement to manage that better, thereby preventing and managing methane releases into the atmosphere from our landfill. We installed a megawatt of energy, renewable energy at the sports center, reducing our carbon footprint by the same amount. We have solar panel on Atoll Rogers now with more to go up on TG Global. We're doing our part. And so we call on all citizens and all groups to do their part. Because the thing is that even though our contribution to the global carbon footprint is small, we're really on the front lines of this war. And our success, the success of this, is not really going to be measured in how many homes are destroyed. It's actually the opposite. It's going to be measured in how many homes are not destroyed, how many lives are not ruined, how many lives are not lost. And so in a way, it makes it that much more difficult to measure. And I'm so happy and pleased to see the young people here today because they're watching. They're watching to see what we do. And this is about them. This is the fight of their generation. And what we do today echoes true for them tomorrow. And so with that, I'm so very pleased to be here and make this declaration. And I thank all of you for coming.
Could we have the names of everybody at the table?
And positions?
Yes, please.
Can we ask questions as well?
Sure, I'm waiting, but get the names first, and then I'll sit here and get my haircut and shave.
Maybe it'd be easier to pass a piece of paper and then the media takes a picture of that paper.
Do it later? Okay.
We do it?
Okay.
Can I go ahead and start?
Sure.
So after Ragged Island was devastated, the government made said it had plans to make that island the first green island.
Correct.
Are you minded to do those kinds of things with ABCO, or implement those kind of regulations to make that island green as well?
Okay. After the event in Ragged Island lended itself more to that kind of declaration because it's more isolated, had a smaller population, therefore a smaller electrical load. The situation in Abaco is a lot different. And certainly Grand Bahamas is a lot different. There's substantial electrical infrastructure already on the island, larger populations, bigger economies, and there are a lot of people that are displaced. The road to recovery now is to get electricity and to get water up and running as fast as possible. So persons in the affected islands can return and begin to rebuild their lives.
I know that globally there are marches and demonstrations on climate change, and one of the mandates is to move away from fossil fuels.
Correct.
Is the government also minded to make those changes and take that stance to move completely away from fossil fuels?
The answer to that is yes. And in that regard, EPL has issued lots of tenders for RE projects, hoping to get responses. And we certainly, as I outlined in my earlier statement, we've done our part here at the Ministry of Environment and Housing.
I have two questions. The first question would be speaking about the rebuilding efforts. Obviously, with Abaco, we sort of have a blank slate. There's some issues in Grand Bahama. When it comes to rebuilding, how will we rebuild to not have homes that would be susceptible to some of the flooding, the high winds? Are we going to possibly see some changes to the building code?
Yes, I can foreshadow changes to the building code. The reason why I say that is because the building code, as it stands now, is set up for homes to withstand winds of 150 miles per hour. But Dorian came and shattered that with gusts in excess of 220 miles an hour. So obviously that has to be revisited. And otherwise than that, the ultimate goal is for an event like this to happen and there'll be no damage. There'll be no loss of life. I mean, that is the ultimate in resiliency right there. And so we have to get to that point. And so 150 mile per hour winds, while it may have been suitable then, as we progress further and further into the 21st century, and we expect these storms to be more frequent and more ferocious, we have to revisit it.
Expecting these storms to be more frequent and more ferocious, are there any long-term government plans, not particularly, isolated to Grand Bahama and Abaco, but for example in New Providence, to prepare for the eventuality that sort of storm will impact the nation's capital?
Yes. In fact, if we were to have a major storm, where the eye of it moved along the southern coast of New Providence, that would be catastrophic. I mean, that would be, because that is where the floodplain of New Providence is. It is on the south coast. So that would be sort of horrific. The thing is that the way to combat it, particularly on a populated island like New Providence where land is at a premium, the way we combat that is to have suitable hurricane shelters and make sure that they could withstand the ferocity, and for people to heed the warnings, to heed that evacuate, means evacuate. And I know it's very difficult to leave your home. It's very difficult to, move out and be among strangers, but we prefer for you to be alive.
So I'm Dr. Anselino Davis, and I'm Sustainability Coordinator for Blue Lagoon Island. When we think about climate change and adaptation and this declaration, we mentioned the term climate justice.
Yes.
And right now, a lot of the initiatives that we're doing are focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions and focusing on renewable energy, which the Bahamas doesn't really contribute that much globally. But our citizens do need to have security, energy security, as well as water security, food security, and those are definitely elements of climate change and climate justice that we can focus on. Can you give us any indication of what you're doing maybe to allow people more autonomy in generating their own electricity, or storing water like rainwater, making those types of things more accessible to Bahamians in our country?
Yeah. I mean, you can generate your own electricity now. In terms of storage of water, and back in the day, we used to build homes with cisterns. I mean, that used to be the norm of the system. The cistern would be outside of the house. But you don't see that. Those are sort of design features. And you raise a great point, because a lot of these are tied to economics. And so, in other words, when persons are faced with this terrible choice of, I only have enough money to build a home and hook it up to BEC or hook it up to water and sewage, it puts the onus on us as a government to make sure that our sources of energy do come from RE, and that our sources of generating water do come from RE. And steps are being made in that direction. I mentioned the RFP, there's one for water and sewage as well, as we see this slow conversion to that. But I wanted to point out, I think that had me sort of thinking about one of the features of this declaration that's going to come out of it is we expect the Prime Minister as well, our Prime Minister, to make a similar declaration on the world stage, so that the world can see that we're on the front lines of this and we're taking it seriously. One of the things I want to point out to those who may be listening is when you consider the Caribbean, and you consider from the island of Puerto Rico to Trinidad, which is essentially the entire sort of Leeward Island chain, the Bahamas in the ocean stretches a similar distance. We're such a big ocean nation that our vulnerability is actually huge. It's very, very big. And we're very, very flat. And so you compare those sort of factors, which is why we're making this declaration, and we're saying, hey, we are going to lead this charge. We're going to lead it. And we're going to make sure that our voices are heard by the polluters or the big emitters. And we want citizens, our local citizens, to be more aware of their behavior, be more aware of their activities. I think one of the things I'd also like to point out in relation to this, I can't help myself. Everybody knows that in 2020, we're going to have a plastic ban, the 4 forbidden items. The thing is that most people don't associate plastics with oil, but plastics come from oil, and it is a part of the oil footprint, of the hydrocarbon footprint. So when we think of renewable energies and we think of the things that we're going to do with RE, part and parcel of that is coming off of plastics. It's really two sides of the same coin.
Any other immediate interventions government or ministry is planning in terms of in addition to the plastics ban?
Yes.
After that?
Excuse me. The Attorney General promised, I don't know if you remember some time back, a suite of environmental legislation, and he's delivered a lot of them in draft, and that we're reviewing. one of the two fundamental things that we want to do is in addition to the plastics legislation, is to amend the Bahamas National Trust Act, amend the Bahamas Protected Areas Fund Act. We want to introduce an act to establish the Ministry of Environment, which is very important. And we also want to introduce an act to establish the Department of Planning and Protection, which is also very important. And these are things that will put into bear and take us down the road of better environmental stewardship and give us the ability to levy the kinds of fines that should be proportionate with the sort of event that may generate and cause the fine to occur. So that goes to the environmental justice point, because environmental justice, outside of some of the social contexts that we talked about, is also a legal framework issue. And so we have to build a legal framework by which to act.
Any idea when we'll see those bills in Parliament?
I'm trying very hard. We're in the review stage. My PS, I'm not calling any names, but she's been working so hard, and I congratulate everyone here at the Ministry of Environment and Housing. They've really been dedicated to this. Many a day we were locked in a room just going over the draft legislation. We'll present it to Cabinet as soon as we can. Obviously, we're constrained by the recent events of Dorian, but we will get it there. Some of it has already been released to the public for review, but we'll get it there and we'll introduce it to Parliament. We'll be sure to. Yes. The goal is to get it there this year, this sort of parliamentary year. You know, we open again in October. I think it's 4th of October.
On Tuesday, you mentioned the removal of debris
Yes.
from the islands, and you
Yes.
said that it would take tens of millions of dollars.
Yes.
So considering it would take, I guess, a large amount of money, when can we expect to see the debris to be moved and cleared up on the island? So I guess people can begin to move
Yes.
in and start rebuilding.
Yeah.
And also, is that fund available for the debris to be removed?
Okay. I mentioned to you on Tuesday, we were talking about the debris removal. I think I mentioned 1.5 billion pounds of debris in Marsh Harbour. Now, that was an estimate given to us by the UNDP. There are other estimates out there. But debris removal has already begun. So notwithstanding the tens of millions of dollars, there are volunteer agencies here on the ground, there are private citizens on the ground that have begun the debris removal, certainly from their homes and their premises. Another facet of debris removal will have to be the insurance adjusters, particularly for those homes and businesses that were insured. They would go through that process, and the larger scale debris would take a little bit more time. The Ministry of Works intends to begin this process, I think, on Monday. I'm talking about the larger works now. The Ministry of Environment and Housing, we've already sent our teams down there to identify laydown sites for this debris to go, to do initial sorting before we put it in the laydown site. Because if you would remember, during Hurricane Matthew, there were laydown sites in New Providence, and there was no attempt made to really sort. And sometimes that creates a bigger problem in the end. So we intend to manage the process. But in answer to your question, the public treasury simply doesn't have enough money to pay for the debris, which is why we're so happy and grateful that we have international partners out there who have come to our aid in this regard. It's the same way with building the capital infrastructure. We're going to need assistance for that. And that's why this declaration today puts us in a better position as we lead the charge to get responsible parties out there to assist us as we rebuild our country. The rebuilding process is going to take time. It's going to take years. Dorian, it took generations to build, generations. In 72 hours was gone. So to build that again, it's going to take some time.
On the issue of debris, if I may, has
Sure.
any consideration been given to using the concrete debris, instead of removing that, using them as breakwaters and building hills along paths to break the water, instead of moving that out? Some of that can be used as a breakwater, and that's one question. I have another question.
Okay. I mean, yes, everything is being considered now. The creation of breakwaters is a long-favored engineering feature in terms of shoreline protection. But in addition to that, we want to build sort of green infrastructure as well. And this is something that the Minister of Works is very enthusiastic about. He's discussed it with me many times. this whole idea of having a mixture of built infrastructure and green infrastructure, which simply means, just as you suggested, breakwaters along with preservation of mangroves and in some cases reforestation of mangroves along the shoreline.
The other question is, does the government have a specific policy to mitigate climate change? And if not, are there plans to develop a specific policy? The Bahamas being, as we all agree, one of the most vulnerable countries in the world to climate change, yet our carbon footprint being so small, past administrations' attitude has been, okay, our carbon footprint is so small, we don't need to do it. There's very little we can do. I think we should be the number one examples of the world of the change that we want to see. So is there a policy being designed now to address this issue?
And the short answer to your question is yes. But I do agree with you. We have a moral responsibility to reduce our carbon footprint. I said that earlier, that sort of data can't give you ethics, and ethics is about what are you doing and are you doing the right thing. And so you're absolutely correct. And notwithstanding that our carbon footprint is small, that doesn't take the burden off of us to do what is necessary. Because remember, we're taking this step here today so we can lead the charge. So we could say, hey, we want better for our country. We don't want to go through this all of the time. And so the burden is on us. It behooves us to do what we can to reduce our carbon footprint.
Minister Ferreira, you hinted at two things. One, that the new legislation that y'all hope to get passed for the Ministry of Environment will allow you to collect fines. And the other thing is that our Treasury is not set up or is not equipped with the funding that we need to actually do this recovery or to protect the environment significantly. Will these new acts or these new legislation include some framework so that when fines are collected by the Ministry of Environment, it goes to the Ministry of Environment and to partners that can actually protect the environment as opposed to being lost in the Treasury?
I'll answer this way. Yeah, well, I don't want to really kill you with law. So I'm trying to answer you without being a lawyer. But unfortunately, this one that's really a legal question. We have this concept of the consolidated fund. It's in the Constitution. So by law, money's collected by the government goes into the consolidated fund. I mean, that's a constitutional feature. But the way how that works is that it goes in and then there are budget allocations made, and then it goes back out to the Ministry of Environment. But one of the things that features in the legislation that we propose is the fact that there will be a corporation sole account within the Ministry of Environment, which will allow us a little bit more flexibility in responding to environmental issues and making sure that the money goes where it can be best utilized.
So then to follow up on that, why alter the Bahamas National Trust Act in order to shift around power, if that's what you're going to do? Or why not make the Bahamas National Trust or some other group more powerful in being able to maybe support you in doing this types of stuff, or to gain the funds, sourcing funds internationally, or being direct recipients of funds and such like that?
Yeah, I mean, let me answer that. And I'm sorry I didn't clear this up. The amendment to the Bahamas National Trust Act and the amendment to the Bahamas Protected Areas Funds Act, or Protected Area Fund Act, those are requests made by those organizations. Those are fine-tuned tweaking for the better administration of those organizations. So it's not really taking any power away from them. They made those requests to us. We took them over to the Office of the Attorney General. So that's something that they want. Presently, those entities are empowered to seek grant funding and other types of funding to do their work of conservation in the Bahamas.
Okay, just to be clear, the climate crisis declaration.
Great.
We've done that today. What is the next steps?
Well, the next step, the immediate next step is for our Prime Minister to make a subsequent declaration. And then, of course, I will approach the Speaker of the House of Assembly to do the same. But those are sort of like the first immediate steps. And then thereafter, we look at long-term adaptation. We look at the ability for us to raise awareness around the world and to attract funding to help us as we rebuild our country and we rebuild the lives. I think one of you made a brilliant point that the country simply can't afford. I mean, bear in mind that this storm is going to be, the price tag is going to be in the billions when it's all added up. And I'm not talking, loss of human life, of course, is very tragic, but it's going to be in the billions. And we need that money has to come from somewhere. And so we have to now begin the process of all hands on deck, which means all government hands, all private sector hands, all NGO hands. And we have to do what we can. We can't leave any stone unturned as we attempt and as we go about rebuilding our country.
If I may, the Cat Island Conservation Institute has created an immediate action plan that we will be implementing in Eleuthera, Cat Island, and New Providence. And our approach is community-driven, community-serving. We are creating spaces for us as a nation and in our communities to, one, talk and understand and process what we have experienced. To, two, start to have these real discussions about what does climate change really mean, because most Bahamians don't understand that. Most Bahamians cannot connect climate change to these hurricanes. And so this is something that is of utmost priority for us. The third thing is that we are training community scientists. What this means is using participatory science toolbox that Young Marine Explorers has developed. We are training individuals in our community to go out and collect information on how our beaches have eroded. What is the state of the water quality around the island? What are the state of the mangroves? You know, what do us as in our community, what do we know, what do we understand? Because with this information, we can then make the best decisions possible as to how we rebuild, how we restructure, what is working. You know, what ecosystems, what mangroves were there that saved communities, what areas require us to go in and restore. When we talk about resilience, what we really mean is our ecosystems, our mangroves, our coral reefs, our beaches, they are there to protect us. In our development, we have destroyed them. And now it is essential for our survival as a nation to restore these ecosystems so that they serve us. Not just in their protection, but also because this is our way of life as Bahamians, whether it's from tourism or the food that we eat. And so in October, the Cat Island Conservation Institute will be holding a national stakeholders workshop in Cat Island, where we will be bringing together key private and public sector representatives to present the work that we have done over the past 2 months, and to then broaden this discussion as to how do we engage resilience, how do we build resilience and expand this work within existing institutions throughout the country.
One last thing. I guess for persons who want to learn more about the Cat Island Conservation Institute, we are online at CICI Bahamas on Twitter, on Instagram, and also yme.com/CC Bahamas.
YMEBahamas.org.
YMEBahamas.org/CC Bahamas, and on Facebook as the Cat Island Conservation Institute. So engage there. We're looking for people to join our team and to be able to continue doing this type of work to ensure that more climate resilient Bahamas is possible.
I just wanted to know what the plan is from the government to actually work with NGOs and places like the Cat Island Conservation Institute to use this information that's available to the government, scientific information from the NGOs, like you just said. They're telling us, how much debris is on the ground. What is going to be the method of ensuring that we work with all of these people, all of the resources available to us and willing to help us, and the transparency from the government to all of these organizations to make sure that we are rebuilding in the correct way and the funds are being used in the best way possible. Because I know you mentioned it's with immediacy that we need to get power and water back to the island. But while we're working on doing these things, we need to make sure that we're not misappropriating funds, just trying to do things in a fast way to get things back. We need to do them in a proper and responsible way. And I know with relief efforts, like after the earthquake in Haiti, billions of dollars were misappropriated of aid. So what is the government's plan to be transparent with this process and work with all of the NGOs and help available to us?
You want them to answer that? I'm teasing you, I'm teasing you. I can't help it, my sense of humor gets to that early sometimes. All right, what's happened so far? What's happened so far is that any funds that have come in have gone into an account. That account is being audited and watched by external auditors. So we will produce a paper trail to show where every red cent has gone and what's it been spent on. So you will get that. In terms of data that we receive, it's essential, well, in this immediate crisis mode that we're in, this immediate mode that we're in terms of Hurricane Dorian and sort of the effects, NEMA is really receiving data and applying data. There are organizations on the ground collecting data, and that data is fed into a central repository. And data that's relevant to the Ministry of Environment we certainly can get. In the long term though, when persons go out and do scientific work and they produce data or generate data, it is requested and by law that data should be submitted to us so we could take into account that information in our policy and planning practices. Because as you know, what's happened in the past, I remember when I used to work the fisheries, we would have persons in there doing all kinds of research data, and some of the best information on our coral reefs is sitting in libraries and universities across North America, and that's regrettable. But we've taken steps to change that, and we would want every NGO or every scientific entity, particularly those connecting and dealing with genetic resources, to submit their information to us, and we intend to ensure that that happens.
Along the lines of that scientific data, there was a dearth of georeference and geospatial data that we were really in need of to find where the population centers were in Abaco and Grand Bahama, and to provide assistance to them. And I coordinated an international team to help to map Grand Bahama and Abaco before Dorian, but right now we need the mapping for after. And as far as I know so far, a lot of that information, all the drone flights and the new geo data that's coming out, people are charging for that now. Is your ministry working to get access to that data and then also to make that available to the public for the future of planning for climate change and climate justice scenarios, in particular like surge mapping, elevation maps and stuff like that, so that when we build next time, we're not at risk?
Sure. Okay, the short answer to that is yes, but let me elaborate. We have heard of cases where persons have approached NGOs that have been collecting data sets on a sort of one-to-one basis or on a private basis, and they've been asked to pay a price for that information. And what we've said is that all information that you collect should be submitted to the government as well, that we have a right to our own information, to our own data. And certainly once the government is in possession of it and the requisition is made, data will be made available to the one who's doing the asking. In other words, you'll have access to the data and it will be free. But notwithstanding all of that, I remember there was a guy at Lands and Survey, Loftus Butler, and he went to just an ordinary ordnance survey map, and he compared it with then GIS mapping, and notwithstanding all the ranges and increases in technology, just from an ordinary ordinary ordnance survey map, you can tell the flood zones. You can tell. I mean, where you see wetland, marsh, and you look at the contours. But I take the point, and that process is ongoing. Data collection is ongoing, and once we get it, we'll share it.
In that same vein, are you going to increase funding to the department, the GIS department? I've watched that department flounder over decades. I was there before they started, while they were starting, the struggles they've had to try and actually become incorporated as an entity, and even now they continue to struggle. And this is really a time when they should get the kinds of support. We shouldn't be depending on independence and foreign. We should be depending on our own system. We have a department.
Yeah.
So what are we doing about that? Are we increasing the funding for that department?
You know, I'm actually so glad you asked that because I forgot to brag about that. We, as a matter of fact, since coming to office, we've injected quite a bit of capital resources into that department, the Bengus department, and we're just coming off a study, in excess of $4 million that we injected into it and into the study, where we were mapping some of the islands of New Providence. So we intend to do just that. Of course, strengthening our own capabilities is important. At the end of the day, this is our country and we're responsible for it. So we have to build our own capacity. And I couldn't agree with you more. And we've done just that. Any more questions? No? Exhausted. That hardly ever happens. All right.
Thank you very much.
We have some refreshments, and you're more than happy to have some.
Yes, this is what I think the question is. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, sure, absolutely.
One more question.
You all right? Yes.